Namaskar. Well, friends, let me heartily welcome you all to Bhim Bhasjhya, my audio video podcast series about Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. This audio video podcast series has 54 short speeches of about 20 minutes each on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, unraveling as many as 25 different dimensions of his multifaceted genius. Friends, this podcast series is focused on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, his thoughts, his actions, his philosophy, and above all, the grand vision that he had for our country. So let's move on, friends. Friends, in this episode 24, I take up yet another critical dimension of Dr. Ambedkar's multifaceted genius. That is, Dr. Ambedkar as a warrior against the caste system. Let's begin with a research paper which Dr. Ambedkar published way back in 1917. When Dr. Ambedkar, Bhimrao Ambedkar then, was pursuing his PhD doctoral studies at Columbia University, United States, he took a seminar on anthropology under Professor Goldenweiser. The theme of that seminar was primitive versus modern society. As a participant in the seminar, Dr. Ambedkar presented his research paper to his fellow students on May 9, 1916, and it was published later in the journal Indian Antiquary in May 1917. Please note that this research paper was written when Dr. Ambedkar was barely 25, 26 years old. And see the depth of analysis at such a young age. Well, friends, let me present a short summary of this brilliant research paper by Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. The title of this research paper was, and I quote, "Castes in India, their genesis, mechanism, and development." There is no country that can rival the Indian peninsula with respect to unity of its culture. Caste is a parceling of an already homogeneous unit, and the explanation of the genesis of caste is the explanation of this process of parceling. Analyzing the work by the then leading scholars Senart, Nesfield, and Ketkar, Dr. Ambedkar concludes prohibition, or rather the absence of intermarriage, endogamy to be precise, is the only one that can be called the essence of caste. Caste in India means an artificial chopping off the population into fixed and definite units, each one prevented from fusing into another through the custom of endogamy. Endogamy is the only characteristic that is peculiar to caste. And if we succeed in showing how endogamy is maintained, we shall practically have proved the genesis as well as the mechanism of caste. Dr. Ambedkar goes on to say, and I quote, "Endogamy is foreign to the people of India. With the people of India, exogamy is a creed and none dare infringe it. With exogamy as a rule, there could be no caste. For exogamy means fusion. but we have castes. Consequently, in the final analysis, creation of caste, as far as India is concerned, means superimposition of endogamy on exogamy. It is in the consideration of the means utilized for the preservation of endogamy against exogamy that we may hope to find a solution to the problem of the mechanism of the caste. The group that is desirous of making itself into a caste, the maintenance of equality between the sexes becomes the ultimate goal. For without it, endogamy can no longer subsist. The problem of caste then ultimately resolves itself into one of repairing the disparity between the marriageable units of both sexes within it. The husband may die before the wife and create a surplus woman, or the wife may die before the husband and create a surplus man. Both the surplus man and surplus woman constitute a menace to the caste if not taken care of. For not finding suitable partners inside their prescribed circle, very likely they will transgress the boundary, marry outside, and import offspring that is foreign to the caste. Surplus woman can be disposed of in two different ways so as to preserve the endogamy of the caste. First, burn her on the funeral pyre of her deceased husband and get rid of her. Second remedy is to enforce widowhood on her for the rest of her life. She can be degraded to a condition in which she is no longer a source of allurement. You cannot accord the same kind of treatment to a surplus man as you can to a surplus woman in a caste. Burning him with the deceased wife is hazardous in two ways. First of all, it cannot be done simply because he is a man. Secondly, if done, a sturdy soul is lost to the caste. There remain then only two solutions which can be conveniently disposed of him. He may be forced or induced to remain a widower for the rest of his life. Surplus man can be provided with a wife only by recruiting a bride from the ranks of those not yet marriageable in order to tie him down to the group. It will now be seen that the four means by which the numerical disparity between the two sexes is conveniently maintained. These are: 1. Burning the widow with her deceased husband; 2. Compulsory widowhood, a milder form of burning; 3. Imposing celibacy on the widower; and 4. Wedding him to a girl not yet marriageable. These means create and perpetuate endogamy, while caste and endogamy are one and the same thing. Thus, the existence of these means is identical with caste, and caste involves these means. This, in my opinion, is the general mechanism of a caste in a system of caste. Dr. Ambedkar says, if we scrutinize the solution that the Hindus arrived at to meet the problem of surplus man and surplus woman, they have three singular uxorial customs. 1. Sati, or burning of widow on the funeral pyre of her deceased husband. 2nd, enforced widowhood, by which a widow is not allowed to remarry. And third, girl marriage. These customs, which were so highly eulogized, prove that they needed eulogy for their prevalence. They were needed to create the structure of caste, and the philosophies in honor of them were intended to popularize them. For they must have been so abominable, so shocking to the moral sense of the unsophisticated, that they needed a great deal of sweetening. These customs are essentially of the nature of means, though they were represented as ideals. Sati, enforced widowhood, and the girl marriage are customs that were primarily intended to solve this problem of surplus man and surplus woman in a caste and to maintain its endogamy. Strict endogamy could not be preserved without these customs, while endogamy is the only characteristic of caste. Dr. Ambedkar makes a very important statement here. He says, a caste is an enclosed class. The question arises, what is the class that raised the enclosure around itself? The strict observance of these customs and the social superiority arrogated by the priestly class in all ancient civilizations are sufficient to prove that they were the originators of this unnatural institution, founded and maintained through these unnatural means. How did the institution of caste spread among the rest of the non-Brahmin population of the country? Dr. Ambedkar says, Manu did not give the law of caste, and that he could not do so. Caste existed long before Manu. He was an upholder of it and therefore philosophized about it, but certainly he did not and could not ordain the present order of Hindu society. His work ended with the codification of the existing caste rules and preaching of the caste dharma. The spread and growth of the caste system is too gigantic a task to be achieved by the power or cunning of an individual. There is a strong belief in the minds of Orthodox Hindus that the Hindu society was somehow molded into the framework of the caste system, and that it is an organization consciously created by Shastras. Not only does this belief exist, but it is also being justified on the ground that it cannot but be good because it is ordained by the Shastras and cannot be wrong. The Hindu society, in common with other societies, was composed of classes. And the earliest known are 1. Brahmins or the priestly class. 2. The Kshatriyas, the military class. 3. The Vaishya or the merchant class. 4. The Shudra or the artisan and menial class. Particular attention has to be paid to the fact that this was essentially a class system. At some point in the history of the Hindus, this priestly class socially detached itself from the rest of the body of people and through a closed door policy became a caste by itself. The Vaishya and Shudra were the original inchoate plasm which formed the sources of numerous castes of today. The subdivision. The subdivision of a society is quite natural, but the unnatural thing about these subdivisions is that they have lost the open door character of the class system and have become self-enclosed units called caste. The question is, were they compelled to close their doors and become endogamous, or did they close them of their own accord? I submit that there is a double line of answer. Some closed the door, others found it closed against them. Endogamy, or the closed door system, as it had originated from the Brahmin caste, it was wholeheartedly imitated by all the non-Brahmin subdivisions or classes who in their own turn became endogamous. Brahmins, idolized by the scriptures and venerated by the priest-ridden multitude, were believed to be the very end of creation. Such a creature is worthy more than mere imitation, but at least of imitation. If he lives in an endogamous enclosure, why not rest follow that example? In a way, but only in a way, the status of a caste in the Hindu society varies directly with the extent of observance of the customs of sati, enforced widowhood, and the girl marriage. But observance of these customs varies directly with the distance that separates caste from caste. Those castes that are nearest to the Brahmins have imitated all the three customs and insist on the strict observance thereof. Those that are less near have imitated enforced widowhood and girl marriage. Others, a little further off, have only girl marriage, and those further off have imitated only the belief in the caste principle. This leaves no doubt that the whole process of caste formation in India is the process of imitation of the higher by the lower. European students of caste have unduly emphasized the role of color in the caste system. Themselves impregnated by color prejudices, they were readily imagined it to be the chief factor of the caste problem. The color of the skin had long ceased to be a matter of importance. Well, friends, Dr. Ambedkar summarizes his research paper by saying, my study of the caste problem involves four main points. First, that in spite of the composite makeup of the Hindu population, there is a deep cultural unity. Second, that the caste is a parceling of bits of a larger cultural units. Three, that there was one caste to start with. And four, that classes have become castes through imitation and excommunication. Well, friends, let's conclude this session here. But before I leave, let me remind you that if you like this audio video podcast series, like it, share it, subscribe to it. So long before we meet again real soon. Thank you. Namaskar.